Hello, I'm Jonasz Lewiński. Welcome on board the Eastern Express. And as always, I hope you enjoy the journey. In Georgia, opposition politics are suddenly a high-risk career move. With local elections just months away, the ruling Georgian Dream party is detaining rivals one by one. Are these the last gasps of democracy in Tbilisi, or just another day at the office for Georgia's richest puppet master, Bidzina Ivanishvili? Once a beacon of democracy in the post-Soviet landscape, Georgia is now sliding towards authoritarianism. With Russia, China and Iran circling like vultures, can the West pull Georgia back from the brink, or is democracy in Tbilisi officially on life support? Well, without further ado, let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
The Georgian Dream is continuing down its path towards total authoritarianism. The party has already been heavily criticized by Georgia's Western partners for its crackdown against peaceful protesters, journalists and oppositionists. Yet now the Georgian Dream has gone even further. The government has detained 8 key opposition figures ahead of the country's local elections. These detentions are a fulfillment of a pledge made by the Georgian Dream's mysterious and controversial honorary chairman, Bidzina Ivanishvili, who pledged to imprison opposition leaders for, quote, treasonous actions. This is not the first time that the Georgian Dream has arrested political opponents. Opposition leaders such as Nika Gvaramia have been behind bars for the last 8 months. Given recent statements by the Georgian government, it seems hell-bent on forging a Georgia that fits solely its own image, no matter the price.
We will do everything possible to ensure the continued progress of our nation in every sphere. That is our duty to society.
The arrests come as protests against the government continue. These started last year in the wake of the parliamentary elections, which observers believe may have been rigged. Many, including thousands of Georgians, are becoming increasingly terrified of the prospect that Georgia, under its increasingly more authoritarian government, will fully step away from its once bright EU future.
And now we're zoning in on the East-splaining portion of our show. Georgia was once seen as one of the most prominent countries to strive for EU membership. Since the Georgian Dream declared victory in 2024 parliamentary elections, however, relations between the bloc and the country have soured almost completely.
The European Union has made itself clear when it comes to the recent actions taken by the Georgian Dream government. Georgia will not join the EU until its leaders steer away from the current authoritarian path. The European Parliament has reaffirmed its support for the Georgian people and has said it does not recognize the country's government. The EP also pointed out Georgia's restrictive media environment and denounced the detentions of Georgian opposition figures. The European Council had already suspended visa-free travel for Georgian diplomats and officials over the government's crackdown on pro-EU protests. This is not the first time that Georgia's EU candidacy has been put into question. In November 2024, Georgian Prime Minister Irakli Kobakidzeh said that the country's EU accession negotiations had been suspended until 2028. In November 2024, Georgian Prime Minister Irakli Kobakidzeh said that the country's EU accession negotiations had been suspended until 2028. Although he claimed that the government would continue to introduce the reforms necessary for Georgia to join the bloc by 2030. Given the current state of affairs, however, it seems unlikely that Brussels will want to move forward with the accession process.
And now, as always, it's time to explore the issue in greater detail. A decade ago, Georgia was the poster child for post-Soviet success. It was cleaning up corruption, fostering a vibrant civil society, and even sending soldiers to Afghanistan despite not being a NATO member. Fast forward to today, and Georgia is making headlines for entirely different reasons. Mass arrests, rigged elections, and increasingly cozy relationships with Russia, China, and Iran. At the heart of this troubling shift is billionaire Bidzina Ivanishvili, Georgia's shadow ruler and puppet master-in-chief. His ironically named Georgian Dream party now controls every branch of government, and almost all credible opposition leaders have found themselves behind bars. Human rights groups estimate there are now around 60 political prisoners languishing in Georgian jails. So many, they're practically running out of space. And protests have rocked Tbilisi for over 200 days now, ever since last year's parliamentary elections. Unsurprisingly, international observers called last October's vote neither free nor fair. The opposition boycotted the results, leaving Georgian Dream to pass a series of authoritarian, Russian-style laws unopposed. Now, The European Parliament is openly calling Georgia an authoritarian state, demanding new elections and a return to democratic reform. When even Brussels, known for measured diplomatic language, is sounding alarm bells, you know your head's gone. The country is rapidly becoming a playground for authoritarian regimes looking to expand their influence. Last year, the government abruptly cancelled a key Black Sea port contract with a US and European consortium, handing it instead to Chinese firms, some conveniently under American sanctions. Prime Minister Irakli Kobahize himself attended the funeral of Iranian President Ebrahim Raisi, mingling with leaders from Hamas and Hezbollah. Forget Euro-Atlantic integration. Georgian Dream seems more interested in joining an axis of autocrats. The United States, once Georgia's closest ally, is now grappling with how to respond. Enter the Megobari Act, a bipartisan bill promising targeted sanctions against corrupt Georgian officials. Now, Megobari, Georgian for friend, is essentially America's tough love strategy. Sanctions that sting just enough to remind oligarchs that actions have consequences. And it's clearly hitting a nerve in Tbilisi, with government officials accusing US lawmakers of anti-Georgian sentiments. With municipal elections looming in October, the opposition is caught in an existential debate to participate or not. And they better make their minds up quick, because the Georgian Dream won't wait on a decision to imprison them. Former Prime Minister Georgi Gagaria, now labeled a traitor and facing serious prison time, calls this election possibly the last democratic battleground. For Georgia, the choice is stark: reclaim democracy now or risk becoming yet another cautionary tale of authoritarian decay. And now, here to shed more light on the issue is Shota Agvineria, non-resident fellow at the Economic Policy Research Center. Hello and welcome to Eastern Express.
Hello, and thanks for the invitation.
So Georgia is often described as a country that is currently engaged in democratic backsliding. But in order to slide back, you still need to have some space. Do you think we've reached a point that there is no sliding back to be done, because essentially the Georgian Dream Party has reached the bottom?
This is something that we said a few times before, that that's the bottom, but Georgian Dream always managed to surprise us with coming up with the new bottoms. What I can tell you is that basically talking about the democratic backsliding is absolutely dated for now, because there is no more democracy in Georgia. Absolutely not. It's a full-fledged autocracy, so there is nothing else to roll back. But what the Georgian Dream can certainly do, and I feel this is what they're doing, is to consolidate this autocracy even further. They have created tools for that. They have prepared legislation, and they are warning us in the broad daylight that everybody who is not ready to accept the new policies of the government will be repressed and prosecuted one way or another.
So they've actually promised to begin this sort of persecution of opposition right after the elections, and the elections themselves also were considered not to be free or fair. And now it appears that with local elections coming up, they are continuing on this course. More arrests were being made, more opposition politicians have now found themselves in jail. Would you say that essentially there is no more limits as to what the Georgian Dream government is prepared to do, that they will continue until the opposition essentially is non-existent in Georgia?
Yes, absolutely. And I would also add to your question one little detail, which is important, I think. The Georgian Dream actually didn't start signaling prosecution of the opposition after the elections. They started signaling it before the election. So one of the main lines of Georgian Dream's pre-election campaign was that if they win these elections, they will actually ban opposition parties, and they will create a new opposition environment, which will be a good opposition. And this good opposition will basically care about the interests of the country, and this rhetoric, we of course recognize what that is. There is this standard authoritarian rule book which says that anything that is against us has to be eliminated one way or the other. And this is exactly what we're looking at. They have created this so-called parliamentary investigative commission, with the sole purpose of creating the pretext and creating this, let's say, the quasi-legal mechanism for enforcing their political decision to send all opposition leaders to prison and to finally eliminate political dissent in this country. So what we're looking at is basically the political decision that the opposition parties should be eliminated. Then they created the specific tool within the legitimate parliament for that. And now we see the execution of that political decision. And most of the political leaders are already in jail. The rhetoric and the actions of the ruling regime actually suggests that there will be more prosecutions and more violence against the political opponents.
So now the international community is looking at this, and many countries are not happy at all. In the United States, the Megoberry Act is being prepared to actually provide some sort of leverage over the oligarchs which rule Georgia today. Do you think it's likely to be successful?
Well, actually, that's the only remaining tool to somehow reprimand aggressive actions of the Georgian Dream. I'm not sure it's been successful so far because we have not seen really decisive steps and actions from our partners. Somehow I feel that our partners are still in the warning mode. They're sending the warning signals. We have heard final warnings that basically Georgian Dream has come very close to the point of non-return. And what we see from the European Union in the statements of the Commission or the Parliament is that somehow our partners still hope that there is a way to reverse this tide and to get Georgian politics back on track towards democracy, towards European integration, etc., etc. Things that the Georgian public is obviously and clearly demanding from the government.
But how would that happen? How would this happen?
Because also has the limits.
Yes. What do you think would be the way to make this happen, short of having a new government in place, essentially? Because if we have a government which came to power following elections which are considered to have been partially, at least, fraudulent, and also one that has already made so many steps away from this democratic path, wouldn't you say that coming to a compromise with the very same government would be like having, you know, fruits from the poisoned tree, something that is not going to be viable in the long run anyway?
I absolutely agree with your assessment and analysis. I don't think there is any resource left in the Georgian Dream to basically reverse this authoritarian trend and to start demolishing this very well consolidated authoritarian axis of power that they have been creating for the last 12 years. There is absolutely no room for that in my understanding, but somehow, you know, what we hear from European leaders, politicians, is somehow geared towards this utopian possibility. What I think is actually coded behind the statements and calls on the Georgian Dream government to return to this democratic path is basically the new elections. So what would be considered as the best optimal outcome of this pressure and dialogue with the Georgian Dream would be the new democratic elections, which is, again, very difficult to imagine how on earth, even if the Georgian Dream government somehow agrees to call new extraordinary elections in this country, it's very difficult or impossible to imagine how that can be a democratic election. And it will be conducted exactly the same fraudulent way that the previous elections and the elections before that were conducted. So I would say it's the waste of time. And the real painful sanctions against the leaders of the regime and against the ones who are in charge of the violence against the Georgian people and in charge of the fraudulent election campaign and the judiciary process is the only way forward in this situation.
Now, speaking of sanctions, but looking at this from a different perspective, do you think that the Georgian Dream currently is planning to turn Georgia into a sanctions-busting center, so to say, a hub for avoiding sanctions through cooperating with countries like Russia and Iran?
Yes, absolutely. We have seen this for a few years now. After the start of the war in Ukraine, Georgia has become a country that was used by Russia and other authoritarian regimes like Iran, for example, for avoiding and finding these back doors to and out of Russia. And that has been proven on many accounts by investigative journalists, by the think tank reports, and this is not new. What is new now is that after the Georgian Dream's leadership and the authorities in place have been sanctioned by the Western partners, they have basically started to merge and grow deep into this new authoritarian axis. They have openly communicated that they don't care about the sanctions because the West is not something that they see as their side anymore. So they earn their money in Russia and they have grown as a full-fledged part of the authoritarian club. So they basically earn their millions in that Russian sphere of influence, and they have become the part of the system that whitewashes that money that is earned through different, I would say, illegal means. And for that part, I don't think, again, there is the way back, because we're speaking about the millions and millions of money that is going directly into the pockets of the political leadership, and that's something they're not willing to give up, I'm afraid.
Shota Agveneria was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insight.
Thank you.
And now we're moving on to Eastern Newsflash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you definitely don't want to miss. Russia is locking itself away from the rest of the world even further. This time, Vladimir Putin signed an executive order that requires all ships arriving from abroad to have FSB's permission to dock.
The order itself cites a certain constitutional provision which refers to wartime legal conditions. It essentially says that any ships en route from foreign ports can dock in Russian ports only after they have received permission from a representative of Russia's security service. This decision comes amid Russia heightening security measures in the wake of an increased number of Ukrainian attacks inside of the Russian Federation. According to a recent Financial Times report, a string of bomb attacks on oil tankers across the world has fueled speculation that Ukraine may be attempting to sabotage Russia's shadow fleet of vessels that it uses to bypass Western sanctions on oil. 5 of the ships involved in these incidents had reportedly visited Russian ports shortly before they were hit.
A certain town in Spain, namely Villajoyosa, has become a location lifted straight out of a crime thriller. A former Ukrainian police official has been found dead in the same residential complex where a Russian defector was assassinated last year.
61-year-old Ihor Hrushevsky was found dead under mysterious circumstances, according to Spanish media. His body was found floating face down in a swimming pool at the Kala Alta residential complex. The man was a former senior officer in Ukraine's Department for Combating Organized Crime. Although an initial investigation suggested no signs of violence, witnesses noted he was bleeding from one ear, which suggests a cerebral hemorrhage or a stroke. What makes this death particularly unnerving is that it occurred in the same place as that of Russian pilot Maxim Kuzminov, who defected to Ukraine with a military helicopter in 2023. Kuzminov was found shot dead in the same complex in February 2024. A direct connection between these two deaths has not been confirmed.
Armenia seems to be continuing its policy of not doing everything that Russia demands. In a recent decision, Yerevan declined the extradition of a Russian soldier who refused to fight in Ukraine.
The Armenian police have stopped Russian military officials from seizing a former Russian soldier who had fled the Russian Federation. Semyon Subotin, a former member of Russia's strategic missile forces, refused to serve in Ukraine. He fled to Armenia in September 2024 after he was placed on Russia's wanted list for desertion. He lived in Armenia without legal status after Moscow released an international arrest warrant against him. Subotin learned that Russian military officials had arrived in Armenia in person to forcibly take him back to Russia. In response, he voluntarily approached Armenian police and asked for protection. Armenian authorities detained him for a mandatory 72 hours. The Russians reportedly tried to collect Subotin directly from the detention facility without adhering to proper procedures. The Armenians denied them access and Subotin was released to the care of his lawyer. He is currently free in Armenia, but awaits possible formal extradition proceedings.
And for this episode of Eastern Express, it's the end of the line. Please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates. I'm Jonasz Rewiński. Bye for now.